Good evening, everybody. I'm Mila Kotick, Director of Public Programs here at Science World. Welcome. I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. Tonight, we are thrilled to be hosting the fourth event of the series To Catch a Falling Sky in partnership with Simon Fraser University Faculty of Environment and the Pacific Water Research Center. This series embodies the essence of Science World's convening mandate to bring people and communities together to learn about and discuss difficult and sometimes controversial topics, and most importantly, to take on the challenges of our times so that we can contribute to the health of our place together. Science World vision is, within a generation, Canada will be a country of thriving, sustainable communities rooted in science, innovation, and a deep connection to nature. We can achieve this vision by creating and facilitating inspiring and informative events with valued community partners like we are this evening. I want to thank Simon Fraser University and the Pacific Water Research Center for being such terrific community partners. I would also like to acknowledge the support of the Consulate General of the Netherlands and Mr. Henk Snoken, the Consul General. And now I'd like to introduce Naomi Krugman, Dean of the Faculty of Environment, SFU. She has just joined SFU this year, and she would like to share a few words about the faculty.
Thank you so much. I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. I mean, really, if we think about the future, we have to have alternatives in our mind. We can't learn just the bad news and what we're doing wrong. We have to see there is a different way of doing things. And green infrastructure offers us a set of alternatives that are really quite doable. They're actually tried and true in many places, and we can already implement them with actually low cost in many places. I'm very happy to be here as the new Dean of the Faculty of Environment. I just want to let you know it is one of the only interdisciplinary Faculty of Environments in Canada, the only one in Western Canada. And we are particularly interested in teaching students and working with communities on alternatives, testing those alternatives and bringing those back into scholarship so that other people can benefit from that learning. So thank you to Zafer Adil for organizing this whole speaker series, and thank you for being here. Perhaps I'll see you tomorrow at the Climate March.
Thank you. We have an international group of green infrastructure innovators speaking here tonight. And to tell us a little bit more about our evening is Dr. Zafer Adil, Executive Director of the Pacific Water Research Center in the Faculty of Environment at Simon Fraser University.
Thank you very much, Mila. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all once again on behalf of Pacific Water Research Center and Simon Fraser University. As you just heard from our dean, this is a great way to start dialogue. And I think we have, as you will see in a few moments, three really great speakers who can hopefully inspire you and motivate you to start to rethink how we engage with urban development and how we go about looking at use of innovations like green infrastructure in order to achieve our goals. So the evening today will go as follows. We'll start with presentations from each of the three panelists, and we'll start with the more international perspective, and we'll move to Vancouver, and then we'll get some views on how things are taking shape down in the United States. And we will, at the end of those presentations, we'll have a very interactive and engaged dialogue, and we would like all of you to be part of that conversation. And those of you who have been here know that interaction creates a lot of energy and a lot of enthusiasm, and that's something that we really enjoy, and we really hope that that also brings a similar level of excitement about solutions to you as well. So Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Sacha Stolp. She's the Director of Innovation for Future-Proof Assets in the City of Amsterdam. So I love that title. Innovation for Future-Proof Assets. I think that's, whoever came up with that, I think it was brilliant. So it's a crossover program between the Department of Engineering and Department of Urban Management. And in that role, she prepares not only the existing city planning processes, but also looking at climate change, raw material transitions, ongoing development of smart city, and how it all fits together. She also has a title of the Mediator of Innovation, another one, I love that. And so she's developed some very interesting projects, and I will let her describe those to you herself. She's studied economics at the University of Amsterdam, and she's also held a number of very prestigious positions and designations throughout Netherlands. And I'll close off with her personal slogan, which, again, I fell in love with when I read it. And it's, let's immerse ourselves in the mass of people and learn from each other, share knowledge, be optimistic, trust, and cooperate. I couldn't have said it better myself. So please welcome, please join me in welcoming Sasha.
Do you have a microphone that I can walk around a bit? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, super. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for having such a very, very warm welcome. I think we're going to start with a little picture, of course, of Amsterdam. Because I was thinking, rethinking green infrastructure, that might feel like a new process, but rethinking is of all centuries and all ages. So I thought I'd take you a little bit back, 400 years ago, in the time that there weren't vloggers, bloggers, Instagrammers, and no people influencing or taking pictures, whatever. Yes, voilà. There we are. 1600, you can hardly... Is there somebody who hasn't been in Amsterdam? Oh, well, that's... Stay here, they don't want to have tourists anymore, but no, come over, please. Well, if you come to Amsterdam, you'll probably notice that we have quite some trees. Actually, we have 300,000 trees within our city, and they're maintained by us, by the local government of the city of Amsterdam. We have our tree asset management department. But frankly enough, this wasn't the circumstances 400 years ago. Actually, there wasn't any public space. The city was private owned. So we had private owned houses, private owned warehouses, and also a private owned kennel walls. Kennel walls, that's a good word. And they were made of wood. But so in the beginning of 1600, the population was growing, our economy was growing, the boats become bigger and bigger, and then the sailors came in and they slashes out their hooks and took the boats to the side. Well, they still don't have a motor, there was no industrial revolution yet. And those kennel walls broke. And the owners of the city went to the city hall and they complained. Well, they're breaking my structures, and what should I do? You are responsible for that. And the city said, no, we are not. That's a mistake. We are only here to keep you safe and secure. That's all. That's the purpose. That's the meaning of where we are on Earth. We don't do public space because it didn't exist yet. And then there was somebody smart enough to rethink over this whole infrastructure. And they figured out, what happens if we put trees beside these kennel walls? These roots will go in through the earth and it makes it more firm, and it probably gives our city a better structure. But they didn't sell it like that. Funny enough, they sold it like healthy air. They called it sweet air at that time. plaisance, and beautification. And that's a funny part, because they started actually a new economy. It was not only the regulation and the policy which started this, but they became the launching customer of innovation and a green innovation, a green infrastructure actually. And what you see from the 16th century is that they were planting trees. And they actually formed a really stiff structure for it. They make the regulation, it was exactly 4.3 meters between the trees, because it was a construction. And they protected the trees very well. Here you see a very small one, and it's all caved into the wood, and over there too. So they also created a maintenance program around it. And then you got this interesting thing, is that they figured out that these trees were actually cooling the city. They were not only making it beautiful, but they are also a cooling capacity. So what did they do also? They put trees on the squares. And especially, this is called a meat square. That was where the slaughterhouse was and the meat was sold. Still, indeed, they didn't have refrigerators, so you should figure out something to keep the things cold. So what you see over a century, actually, is that first, this is 1540. There aren't any trees on roads. There are only trees in the gardens of the church. And from 1600, you see this structured pattern of trees on squares and on the canal walls. They didn't put it on the regular roads, because that was meant to be for traffic, from side to side for traffic. So, and I think probably this is a picture of one of my first colleagues working, having his job maintaining the city. These were the people who were planting the trees. But not only planting the trees, they had the tree nursery and the whole economy around it. Because they started, funny enough, with Linde. I think that's a common name here too. And it went over to Elms. And that was because the wood of the Linde was too soft for the furniture industry. So there was a whole industry behind it. Rethinking green infrastructure is a multi-purposes benefit. And it's a new economy, creates new jobs. And for everybody who hasn't been in Amsterdam, this is how it looks like today. Actually, we are getting rid a little bit of the cars. We want to have them more out of our historical city. But this is more or less how it looks. It actually is a picture from a tourist information brochure. Because this is what happens when you have trees in your historical center and you have climate change. This was a severe storm last summer, and we had really a lot of damage. And it's not only damage because of the storm, but it's also because we want to put so much in the ground, like cables and wires, so we don't give the roots of the trees enough space to grow. And a tree is underneath the soil just as big as it is on top. So you need to have this space. How are we going to do that? How are we going to provide an energy transition? How are we going to provide stormwater runoff? And also having trees. And also want to have heavier cars because of the transition to electric cars. They are much heavier than regular cars. How do you do this when you are in a historical city? That's the assignment that we're facing right now. And what we think is that we have to look for all the things that nature has to offer. Nature is an ecosystem in itself. And how are we going to provide our city with the ecosystem services that nature can provide? It's circular in itself. All the raw materials, all the energy, all the water is used and reused all over again. Waste is an invention of man that doesn't exist in nature. So how are we going to do that? Well, one of the things that we do in Amsterdam is that we use our maintenance operation for a small part to use it for innovation. So an innovative approach. What can we do in our regular maintenance? And this is a regular maintenance of a roof, and we created on top of this roof a living laboratory in which we're figuring out how these circular nature-based solutions are working. And what you see is two very different plots. Actually, one plot has access to water and the other hasn't. And you see the difference with, after some months, the plot without the water doesn't develop at all, don't provide us the ecosystem service that we needed. And as soon as the plot has access to water, and I will give you later on some details, but I don't think it's very relevant for this presentation, but the fact is that the more evaporating capacity we provide to the city, the more interesting nature we have. And that's not only for the flowers, but especially for the creatures that we want to support in our city, our bees, our insects. And with bees and insects, there are coming birds, and after birds, there are coming foxes. And then we start the whole process over. This is the end of my presentation. We are taking next step every time, and let's rethink nature together again. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. That was quite inspiring. And thank you also for walking us through the history of green infrastructure. So it's good to see that it's been around for a while. So we're learning from our history. So our next speaker is Melina Scholefield. She's the manager of green infrastructure and implementation here in the city of Vancouver. She's a professional engineer with over 2 decades of public and private sector experience. She has a long-standing dedication to sustainability and innovation. In her present role, she's working with her team to lead the city's ambitious RAINS city strategy, which is a cross-departmental program, fairly similar to what Sasha's role is, also working across departments. And prior to taking on this role, Melina has been engaged in private sector and green buildings, and in construction management consulting. Prior to that, she's again worked with the City of Vancouver's sustainability group for 11 years. So very rich experience. Please join me in welcoming Melina also.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Sasha. We're so inspired in Vancouver, and I'm not sure if we should be more inspired by the green infrastructure or the prospect of canals in Vancouver. We do have a little sea level rise issue of our own to deal with in the future. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I'm going to share a little bit about what Vancouver is contemplating right now as part of our Rain City strategy, and the ways in which we're trying to rethink and reimagine our city through the potential of green infrastructure. So I don't need to say it to this audience, because here we are on this most beautiful location in Science World. We're right on False Creek, and Vancouver is without a doubt a city whose entire identity is formed by water. It's a really critical part of our public life, of how we think about our relationship with nature and natural systems, and how we enjoy our city every single day. But of course, those watersheds have changed quite dramatically. So maybe some of the keen eyes in the audience will recognize where we are. This is actually, if you imagine being over, looking towards the North Shore Mountains across False Creek in 1893. And you can see that even in 1893, the watersheds were dramatically changed. In the foreground, you can see that there's actually tree stumps surrounding that whole area. And most of this area that at one time was actually forests and streams and creeks, they were getting ready for the Industrial Revolution that was happening in our own urban environment in Vancouver. And this is exactly the same outlook today. So just imagine In a city today, where does the water go? When rain falls in our city and we have concrete and glass and asphalt, where does the water go? So this is exactly the question that we're actually asking ourselves. And through the Rain City strategy, we're really challenging ourselves to think differently about how we manage water in the city and what could be a new long-term way that we think about helping restore nature and mimic natural processes in our urban environment, because we've largely disrupted that. I know probably many of the local folks here know that where are all the streams in Vancouver? They were there. Today we've got Musqueam that is still fish bearing, and Still Creek, which is sometimes fish bearing depending on how well the year is. So really we've completely transformed our city, and so we're wanting to look back to nature to see how we can be more resilient for the future. So with the Rain City strategy, again, it's really an opportunity to think differently about resilience, about water quality. So for Vancouver, we are a combined sewer city, which means that when there's too much rainfall in our sewer pipes, we get overflows, and I know that that's a problem in False Creek, among many other parts of the city. We also know that stormwater is toxic, and so that's a need that we have to address it. And of course, livability and equity is going to come through healthy urban ecosystems, and so how do we get creative? So Adil said very explicitly, don't talk about the problems. This is all about the innovative ways that we're all trying to hold the sky up through the work that we're doing. And so I thought I would just touch on a few examples of some of the pieces of work that we're doing in Vancouver, starting with green infrastructure in streets and lanes. So here's a couple of snapshots of what you probably see around. So those of you that live out in some of the local residential streets, you might see these nice little bioretention curb bulges. We've got examples of the permeable pavements that are actually here in the Olympic Village. But as we move forward, we're really looking at how do we be more innovative and start changing our green infrastructure to get an even better performance. So I love the pictures of the beautiful big trees in Amsterdam, and having been there recently, those are very, very small public rights-of-way that are supporting very, very large trees. I remember early in my career, I put some trees in actually on Kingsway, and I look back now and I actually feel bad. Like I actually made those trees suffer because I didn't give them enough soil in how I did the designs. This is when I was working in transportation. And so now looking at it as a new lens with green infrastructure, we're looking at some new typologies, and this is one of them that we're really excited about, and we've actually done quite a few now in the city, and we're monitoring for performance. This is called the rainwater tree trench. So what looks on the surface like any other street is actually a huge and ample space for soil and rainwater runoff beneath the surface. So right under the boulevard, right under the bike lane. And it's the intent of this is basically to give those trees the soil and the nutrients and the water access that they need to be very healthy trees with very large canopy trees so that they become, again, part of our water system. Most people don't think that trees are actually like giant water pumps. They help transpirate a lot of water, and they also help cool our city and bring so much habitat value. So we're quite excited about this because in many parts of the city, it's very, very dense. And when you talk about bringing in bioretention or bioswales into the public right-of-way, a lot of people get nervous about how we're going to fit it all in. Well, this is a green infrastructure strategy that allows you to benefit from the ecology in the soil to help clean the water, the ecology with the root system to help address pollutants, and then again get nice healthy trees in our city. This is another project. So down on Quebec and 2nd, actually just in this neighborhood, you can go for a nice walk and check it out after if you like. We've actually got a pilot project where we're doing 4 different approaches to green infrastructure in this one area. We're doing a conventional street approach, we're doing bioswales, and then we're doing a stormwater or rainwater tree trench using structural soil approach, and then one that's using a soil cell, which is like a plastic crate that actually provides the structure and then an ample volume for soil. And so as part of that research, we're testing to see how well the different systems perform. We're looking at how much they cost to maintain, because maintenance budgets is always top of mind for many, many folks, especially at the city. So one part of the pilot project that we're testing here is actually using a sedum map, which most people use on a green roof. So we're actually trying to see if it is a viable alternative to a grass boulevard. So you don't need to mow it, and it tends to be very drought resistant. Looks good. I mean, right now it's flowering. I don't know how it looks at the moment. We'll have to monitor that. But it's just another one of the little ways that we're experimenting and trying to explore how we can use green infrastructure to its fullest potential and make it cost effective and also enjoyable for the city. So for Vancouver, we've been doing green infrastructure for probably about 20 years, but what I would say is that we've typically done it as a one-off initiative. So we've had some great leadership in the private sector, we've had some great leadership in the public sector and at Parks Board, but we failed to make the transition from pilot projects to a broad sort of new way of doing business. And so one of the pieces that we're doing now is trying to say, how do we not use these as a nice to have or a nice addition or the icing on the cake or the little dusting of green that we want to put on the urban jungle here in Vancouver, but actually a really strong part of our water management systems. And so with that, we're looking at how we ensure that they're meeting a whole range of performance outcomes so that our water engineers can get just as excited about how well the green infrastructure is contributing to water management in the city as they would some of the traditional pipe systems that we've depended on for many years. So we've launched a number of monitoring programs, and so far we're very, very happy. Our assets are handling the water that we expected that they would handle. The storms are coming in. It's staying for the right amount of time to get the water quality treatment. They're drawing down, and the water is going back, soaking back into the earth. So so far, we're really pleased with how that's progressing. I mean, this is maybe a little bit more on the technical side of things. This is 63rd and Yukon. I'm not sure if there's any folks here from South Vancouver area, but I encourage you to go down there. This was a leftover corner piece of land in the Marpole neighborhood. And as they were going through their community plan, the community identified it as a potential for like a little mini community park or some such amenity. And so some keen eyes in our planning department thought, well, this is actually an opportunity to showcase rainwater management and how can we bring that into a community amenity and public space. And so there's a beautiful project down there that's actually just a really enjoyable place to be. We've got a neat partnership with the Museum of Vancouver and some local Indigenous youth from Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Tawasin Nation that have produced some beautiful artwork that we're hoping to install in the coming year at this site. And for us as a city, it's been a chance to actually test some new ways of delivering the service. So we've got some new inlet designs that we're trialing for our construction crews. It was learning about what are the methods that they need to use to allow water to infiltrate back into the ground and not excessively compact. And of course, for our crews, it was also a really innovative initiative in that we were able to reuse the soil on site. So rather than preparing a construction site by scraping all the soil off, taking it away as a waste product somewhere, and then bringing in fresh soil for all of the plants, we actually had our team, urban ecologist, look at how we could amend the soil to bring the right composition to get the outcomes we want, both for plant health, but also for dealing with the pollutants in the stormwater. So that was really exciting. We saved a lot of greenhouse gases, we saved a lot of money in trucking, and we made better use of the resources on site. So many folks from Vancouver will know about the Cambie Corridor. We've got a community there that's going to be developing rapidly. I think it's about 40,000 people is expected in the next 20 years in around the Cambie and 41st. So it's kind of like putting the city of North Van into the middle of city of Vancouver. It's a really massive development. And given that today it's largely single-family homes, that's putting a lot of pressure on our pipe system. An inordinate amount of pressure, and that also brings a lot of costs because pipes and a lot of the underground infrastructure, when it needs to be upgraded at scale, is a very costly proposition. And so we are really aggressively looking at a broad range of green infrastructure strategies, local scale and district scale, to help provide servicing. And one of the ideas that we're really excited about that we're wanting to pilot next year is the idea of using our laneways as part of the water management system. So actually designing in significant storage into the laneways. This is just a little snapshot, and you can tell that the Dutch are everywhere. They're influencing us in big ways. But thinking about how we can actually make better use of our roads, because right now roads just are generating rainwater runoff that's often polluted. How can we actually use these public spaces to help us better manage water, even if we still need to have that kind of surface use? So just give a couple of other examples of things that are sort of inspiring our thinking here in Vancouver. This is the MEC head office, actually in the False Creek Flats neighborhood. And what was exciting about this project, it was one of the first salmon safe projects in Vancouver. I think the airport is also designated as salmon safe, and that means that they're taking great care through their entire development process to look at how the building can protect and enhance salmon habitat. So they're looking at how they capture and clean the pollutants. They've got green roofs, they've got blue roofs for water harvesting system, and they've got a whole range of bioretention systems and filtration systems, both for their parking lot and the front. So that's a really great example of leadership from the private sector. Smart Roof 2.0. So a team of us actually went to, this how we first met Sasha. We went to Amsterdam. We were very inspired by the Smart Roof. I think what really stood out for me is that in our community, our current standard is to manage 24 millimeters of rainfall a day. And we go into the Netherlands and they tell me that they're managing minimum of 60 up to 150. And I said, boy, when we talked to our development community, I don't know, I saw Margot and a few other people from industry here, you know, when you talk to, okay, how can we manage this much more water in Vancouver with climate change? We really need to. You know, they look at you like, we're not sure how to do it. And so I thought, okay, well, look at what they're doing in Amsterdam. If for them, they can manage 60 millimeters and think about how to create these incredible biodiverse urban cooling hotspots in their most urban and dense areas, including on wood frame buildings. So can Vancouver. So anyway, what we're really excited about is that we now have a partnership that we've initiated actually with the City of Delta, with BCIT and ourselves. And in fact, if any of you like to go up to City Hall, maybe tomorrow for the protest, I suggest you head towards the Helena Guttridge Plaza, which is the big flat plaza. And we're actually, BCIT is just constructing our very first blue-green roof trial and demonstration areas. So we're going to have 4 different roof types: conventional blue roof, conventional green roof, and then blue-green roof. And we're going to see how well they perform in the Vancouver context. And if they're successful in a grant that we're hoping to support them on, then they're going to have a whole research station out on their campus as well, so that hopefully we can help build that local knowledge and capacity to be able to really expand our thinking. Oh, there we've got the Helena Guttridge Plaza. There we go. Okay, something else that I'm quite excited about for Vancouver is the idea of water harvest and reuse. What a lot of people don't realize is that in the future, water scarcity is going to become much more of an issue, and people perceive water to be plentiful here. And so thinking about how we can harvest and reuse water to meet our future needs and manage stormwater is something we're really excited about. Obviously, this is a real showcase, and most people don't realize that this beautiful convention center that has a fabulous green roof is also treating mass quantities of black water. And it's funny, the operator said to one of my staff recently, gee, I wish we could just get more toilet water, because actually our production facility could do a lot more. We could be generating a lot more water for the community. So these are some of the ideas of thinking about district scale systems and how we integrate water harvest and reuse into our long-term objectives. Okay, so in our local neighborhood, again, looks great, Olympic Village, beautiful, love the Terra Breads and all the other great places to go there. But what I'm not sure if you know is that our most beloved Hinge Park is actually a stormwater wetland. Hinge Park is actually managing 2/3 of the stormwater runoff from the entire community. The other 1/3 is in the giant bioswale that's along the bike route along Ontario Street, which I'm sure many in this audience probably know. So our stormwater infrastructure there is doing so much more than just caring for water. It's creating amazing habitat, including beaver habitat. The only part that any of the locals, maybe you can let me know, I heard that the beaver had 2 babies recently. Yeah, 2 babies. But beavers are very territorial, according to our Parks Board biologists, and this is problematic because the beavers are growing up and they've got no other habitats to go to. So I don't know what's going to happen with that, but it's the same challenge for all of the millennials and others in Vancouver, that we have a serious housing crisis. So we better start looking at where we can expand our habitats for beavers in the city. Anyway, it's funny, we had a international delegation came out, I took them there, and I said, look, even the adults are frolicking in the park, right? This is how much people love this asset, and this asset is a piece of water infrastructure that is doing so much more for the community, and that's really the idea behind green infrastructure. I won't touch on this one long, and I know Rosie's going to talk a lot more about some of the creative things happening in San Francisco, but another piece that we're really excited about is one of the benefits that can come with the higher density developments and some of these large sites and campus opportunities is, again, really advancing concepts around non-potable water. And from a resilience perspective, water security, even in the case of an earthquake, the research shows if they have water locally, it helps them. In Christchurch, New Zealand, the fact that so many people had small non-potable water harvest systems close to home was the difference between life and death for those communities. And as our emergency person likes to remind me, better to send out filters to everybody than to have to ship truckloads of water. So I'm really excited about the potential to combine our aspirations around a more innovative and more resourceful way of managing stormwater with green systems, but also more sustainable systems that are going to help our community and our ecosystems thrive in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Melina. That was awesome. It's great to see that our city right here is being used as a living laboratory, and you're testing out all these exciting ideas that can drastically change how we store and use water. So I think that's really great. And I'm actually quite grateful also because I think we've started building a great partnership between Simon Fraser University and the City of Vancouver. And we've had a number of graduate students who have learned quite a lot from working at the city, and at the same time hopefully contributed also to some of these exciting ideas in getting them closer to fruition. So our next speaker, we're going to move south of the border. Rosie Jenks is the Vice President of One Water NorCal Brown and Caldwell, which is a consulting company. She specializes in urban watershed planning, resiliency, and stormwater management. And she's currently leading the City of Seattle's Integrated Systems Plan. Prior to joining Brown and Caldwell, she served as a program manager at the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, where she provided strategic direction to local practices and supported a number of regional and local initiatives. She was responsible for an award-winning Living Machine project at the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission headquarters, and she also led the Commission's Urban Watershed Assessment Program, which looked at a whole range of applications. Rosie holds an MA in Environmental Planning from University of California, Berkeley. So once again, please join me in welcoming Rosie to the stage.
Thank you. It's such a treat to be on a panel with these brilliant women. All right. So as Adil said, I'm an environmental planner, and I advise cities like Seattle and Portland and San Francisco and Los Angeles on planning and policy around engineering of stormwater, water supply, and resiliency. And I've spent the better part of more than 2 decades asking the question, how can we retrofit our cities to reduce their water footprint to be more resilient to climate change? My story begins with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. I'm going to move this because this is causing trouble. Okay. For those who aren't familiar, San Francisco's Public Utilities Commission, SFPUC, manages the city's water supply, wastewater, and drainage, and provides municipal power through its hydroelectric dams. After graduate school, I was hired to lead the stormwater management program, and at the time, the US EPA had started regulating the Environmental Protection Agency, sorry if I use too much jargon, required the city to regulate the discharge of stormwater coming off of new and redevelopment projects for both quality and within the combined sewer for volume management to keep the loads off the sewer. In Lake Vancouver, my team was tasked with creating policies and programs using green infrastructure. And I'm not going to go into that program too much today because I think Melina covered a lot of wonderful aspects about green infrastructure. And what she asked me to talk a little bit more was really the road we followed to begin doing reuse of stormwater and other non-potable sources. So the road came following a few intellectual paths. The first was really based on the topography and the climate of San Francisco, and also the urban development pattern. If you can see, I don't think I can push it here. Is there down in the map here on the left, you can see all these dots represent the green infrastructure projects and the projects that were regulated by the city. And in the right-hand side is the Bay side, which is where the big urban dense development happened. And the majority of the developments that were happening were large, high-rise lot line development. And what that meant is there was really not much green space to infiltrate stormwater. It was also in an area that was formerly filled land, so it was really seismically vulnerable. And we also happen to be in a Mediterranean climate, which means that you have a lot of rain all at once, followed by long periods of drought. And I'll come back to this in another topic later, but I think that the Mediterranean climate is actually a very good instructive climate for communities around the world to be looking at, because you have to design for these extremes, right? You're gonna have to be able to withstand lots of drought and then a lot of water all at once. And those are gonna be a lot more of the trends that we're gonna be seeing with climate change. So because we have these very steep slopes, places where you couldn't put a lot of green infrastructure, we were being asked by developers to be bypassed by the regulations. And so we really didn't like that solution, right? So the second path came from a really active community. We had a lot of do-it-yourselfers, people that were really committed to water conservation in California and taking it a lot further, right? There was a group called the Greywater Guerrillas that were sort of doing these punk rock illegal projects that were going really bypassing all of the rules and, like, what do you call them here? Bylaws, right? Yeah. She said, don't use the word ordinances, codes. So we call them ordinances and codes, but these are bylaws. And they were really garden educators and people that were trying to do the best they could on their own sites. But what we wanted to do was to provide a path, a legal path, so that they could be, above the law. I'm gonna get my water real quick. Is it down there? Okay. And to streamline that process and actually make it something that we wanted people to do and to support them. But a lot of this work was really focused on exterior uses and not on interior uses. But interior uses soon became a really logical expansion of our work. Oops, I'm gonna grab my notes. We were approached by a woman who was an epidemiologist at the Public Department of Public Health, who wanted to basically install her own rainwater harvesting and reuse system and treat it to really track and monitor the public health impacts and the amount of quality that she could achieve in her own home. But there was no guidance and there was no rules for her to follow. And anybody that came to the departments were just getting flatly denied. And so we felt like that is something we really wanted to take on and work through. So we created a working group with our Department of Public Health and our plumbing inspectors, and we hammered out the first memorandum of agreement for public health that was approved by the Public Health Department for flushing your toilet with rainwater. And the funny thing was that the first response was, oh, well, you have to be able to drink this water. We're like, really, from the toilet? And so we continued to have this discussion and really talk about the perception of risks and the actual risk. And through these discussions, it really became clear that we had a pretty open-minded public health department. And the gentleman, Rajiv Bhatia, who was the department lead at the time, said, you know what? The rainwater is not the dirtiest thing in your toilet. And we were like, you know what? That's right. And because he said, as soon as you take a toilet on, it's really up to you to make sure that it's clean. And the response that happens when you have an overflow is basically people mop it up with some bleach. And so basically you were covering the same risk response for much dirtier water than you would with the rainwater. And so we were able to achieve an agreement that allowed you to flush your toilet by just simply diverting the sediment. There was no advanced treatment required. And so that was a really wonderful breakthrough, and I would really encourage people to meet with the people in San Francisco and talk through what the lessons learned were, because it's a fairly rational response. And And then over time, we began to talk about how do we allow people to have cisterns and rain barrels and gray water systems, and to push the question about how do you get these advanced treatment for when you wanted to do more advanced things like flush your toilet, beyond flushing your toilets, like using it for your dishwasher or for your laundry or hot tubs and things like that. And you know, these questions aren't front and center for you guys here yet because you don't have droughts likely. But I really think that the San Francisco tale is a good cautionary tale for the city of Vancouver to think about, because you may start to have these droughts and you're going to want to have put in the infrastructure and the bureaucratic systems to allow you to be able to move when you need to. And so in a parallel effort, and my beloved old colleague Donna Haase is here today. She was a team member on this project, so it's kind of a treat that she's here. In a parallel effort, I was invited to be part of a team that was developing our new agency headquarters. And at the time, we'd been asking our ratepayers to really have a lot more investment in conservation and adhere to higher standards for conservation. And our leader at the time challenged a small team of us to develop a sustainability program that would really walk the talk and to showcase these sustainable measures that would either look at power, wastewater, and water. And so 98% of the conversations were about power, right? And he had asked us, can you try to get an off-the-grid high-rise? And so that was the challenge that we were to look at. And this was, almost everything that I'm talking about is in a built-out, dense urban city. So this is really the challenge, right? And this neighborhood is considered a historic designation neighborhood that we're in. It's a Beaux-Arts neighborhood, so just to set the context a little bit. And so what ended up happening was we focused a lot on power, and at the 11th hour, we had looked at doing an on-site wastewater treatment that was a high-intensity energy use, but it continued to blow the power budget for the building. And so we looked into these low-energy wastewater treatment systems, and we developed something called a living machine, which is a constructed wetland that pulses the wastewater through it twice a day. So it mimics a natural wetland system. So it has a high level of biological activity. And we created a 5,000 gallon per day wastewater treatment system that treated the water to standards that would allow it to be flushed, using it for flushing the toilet. It also includes a 25,000 gallon rainwater harvesting system for irrigation. And at the end, the water balance showed that after meeting all of the building's non-potable demands each year, we would have an excess of 750,000 gallons per year of water that we didn't have a use for. So that led us, in addition to answering the question, is that going through? I don't know what's happening on this thing. Uh-oh. Does anybody know? Here, there we go. So in addition to sort of not being able to meet the demand for power at an individual building scale, it asked us to sort of expand the question of could we explore the adjacent neighborhood buildings for opportunities to share resources across the timelines that were different. So for example, City Hall might be closed at night, but the power savings could then be used to help another project across the way. And so this grew into expanding the question is how could we have an off-the-grid neighborhood? And so we did an analysis starting with our headquarters as a starting place and developed a plan to retrofit the historic Civic Center. And we created something called the Sustainable Utilities District. So it was really just looking through the utilities lens at all of these questions. And so we created a vision for how we could create a spot of the district that could treat its own sewage, reuse the water for potable purposes, and digest and create power from the sewage solids, and produce our own power, and be able to really, I think most critically, respond to a catastrophic seismic event within 72 hours. And the idea was that this resilient neighborhood is the seat of city government, and it could be the launching ground for supporting the local neighborhood and being a place where there could be readily available water, power, and wastewater services so that the city could rebuild after a large event. Not only would it be that, but it's also a very highly visible tourist destination, so it could be a great educational environment. So a lot of this thought leadership coincided with the beginning of a pretty serious drought. And in 2012, the agency really committed to reducing its potable water intake by about 10 million gallons per day. And I didn't translate to metric system for you guys, I apologize, and launched the non-potable water program. And this diagram shows you really the idea of what water can you get from a building. And it's a lot of jargon if you're not used to it, but it really shows you nicely, like the diagram is you can take the rainwater off the roof. The black water is really when you combine all of the wastewater on the site. We call gray water the water that comes from washing machines and showers. And then there's in the Bay Area in San Francisco, we have a lot of these high-rise developments that penetrate the groundwater, and they're continuously dewatering, and that's another great source of water. And the co-benefit of that is it's not taking up space in your sewer all the time. So it was really for the first time that both of the departments, the wastewater and water departments, were working together, really thinking about how these different goals could really kind of play together, both from a regulatory standpoint and from creating incentives and strategies around these things. So the program really evolved over time. We began first by just allowing it to happen, right, in a single building. And then the question was, how do you do the governance and the oversight going between buildings? And then over time, we began to require this of all new buildings. So all buildings over 250,000 square feet in San Francisco have to put these non-potable reuse systems inside. And it is creating a lot of change, right? This is a brand new set of ways of doing business for the industry, for designers, for the utility practice. But it is a drought-stricken environment, and this is basically water that is available and would have just all been wastewater at that time. And recent advances are that we're now beginning to look at how to take this black water and treat it to potable standards. And so there's a demonstration project at the agency right now to do that with the living machine water. And so if you go to San Francisco, you can begin to see these projects that are sprouting up that really show the coming together of these different ordinances and these different guidelines that all got into place. So this is really what, sort of the use of rules and regulations and advanced planning can achieve over time, especially when you have a really robust development community and you kind of get these systems in place in advance. So this project on the left is a really fun one to visit. It's the Trans-Bay Terminal, sort of the central station of the West, they're calling it. And it looks just like a great rooftop park, but it's actually a combination of a gray water treatment system, and it is treating it in the park, in the constructed wetlands itself. And so there's some examples. I think San Francisco really stole a lot of ideas from a lot of great examples from different places. Portland's been working on district scale systems that you can go and see. When I was in grad school, I went and visited these really wonderful and whimsical examples. This is a neighborhood block, a lower density residential block in Denmark, or in Norway, which has a wastewater treatment system that also is used for growing plants. And so it's an economic development project where they're selling 40,000 plants per year. That is raising money as well for the neighborhood. Here's an example of an ecological laundry where they're using these living machines to treat laundry, and it's like a residential gathering place. It has aquariums with turtles, and the fish and the turtles basically move in the direction of how clean the water is, so it's a biological indicator of how treated the water is. So these are some great examples. And I think the question is, what's next, right? We've advanced all these questions, and what do we need to think about next? And I think the sobering question with tomorrow's climate march and all is, like, how are we going to explain to our children that we use water to manage sewage? Like, that question was, how did you did what with potable water? And I think there's some examples to be found in where we're headed next. I think the Bullitt Center in Seattle is one of my favorite examples, because up until this time, I hadn't seen any composting systems that were in a dense city, right? You see them in these sort of like eco camps and, suburban environments or rural settings, but this is a 6-story building that is treating, it has basically a waterless sewage system, and it has composting in the basement. One of the sort of the losses of the living machine in the San Francisco project was that all the wastewater operators were like, well, you still got all that solids. Got to go in and pump that out, and that was a loss, right? They'd have to come in and pump it out. You didn't win on that question. And then these solids have to be digested and then trucked and spread on farmland or put into landfill, and so that's a loss. But what I really like about the Bullet Center is it composted on site where it gets really small, and it only needs to be taken out once per year. So these are the kind of innovations that make a big difference. In the Bullet Center, they also collect their gray water and they treat it for irrigating their green roof. They are treating their stormwater and rainwater to potable standards for drinking. And so I think these are some of the innovations that we can start to see to bring at scale in dense urban environments. And then taking these ideas a step further, a couple years ago I ran into this company, and it's called Home Biogas, and they had created a product where you take your your food scraps, your compost, and you put it in this backyard system, and it creates enough fuel to give you cooking fuel for 2 hours a week. 2 hours a day. And I was like, whoa, I wish that they could do something with sewage, and they did. So they created a composting toilet that connects to a fuel system for your stove. And so it's not only doing the benefit of composting it way down. I asked them, what do you do with their solids? There really aren't that many solids because they compost it down so much. And so you could imagine a system like this where in San Francisco anyway, we have curbside compost collecting. You could basically probably have this system and put it in your curb. And so this is where I think we need to head, right? We need to get water out of our sewage system. We're going to be needing to drink that recycled water. There's not going to be enough. And then even further, I think the question is, a lot of these systems, as you see them, have a lot of extra pipes and pumps and treatment systems, and they're really high energy intensive. And while resiliency is not the same as efficiency, I think we're going to be looking at a lot less available power into the future, and we need to start thinking that way as well. And so how can we look to ancient practices, places where there was the genius of bringing water in and also doing it with beauty and sacred, a sense of the sacred about it. And so how can we sort of merge those pieces with what we know about public health? And how can we bring what's the best about what we've learned through regular sewage treatment, that we're not getting sick all the time from sewage in our water, but what can we do to bring those two together? And so that's the challenge I give to you all, is to really think that's where we really need to go. That's the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie. That was great. I think it's reinforced my belief that when you're faced with some really stark challenges, that's where the innovation really starts to shine. And I think particularly in California, when you have water drought situations that persist over a number of years, I think people start to think really innovatively. So it was great to see the examples. And we actually had a workshop this morning with a number of municipalities. And I think this point came up that there is a perception, it most likely is incorrect, that there is no water scarcity problem in Vancouver. I think pretty soon we're going to see not just the few incidences we had like in 2015 and 2017 where we had drought and there were water usage restrictions. It's probably going to get a fair bit worse in the years to come unless we have some of these innovations kicking in and being operated at scale. So you've heard 3 great presentations. I'm sure, like me, you have lots of questions that you want to pose to these speakers, and that's exactly what we're going to do now. So please bear with us for a few moments while we set up the stage and invite the 3 panelists to come up, and we'll start the conversation. Okay, great. So we're ready to get started with the other exciting part of today's conversation. And before I open up to have your questions be taken in, and please get them ready, I'll maybe give an opportunity for the 3 speakers to maybe if they have questions for each other, because you come from perhaps with similar experiences, but being applied in very different settings. So it might be useful to explore those differences and similarities a little bit. So let me see if you have any questions.
had a question about just how water and wastewater are being thought of in the City of Vancouver's resiliency planning.
Well, what I would say is the Rain City strategy. So for those of you who know other municipalities in the region, all of us are actually required to do what's called an integrated rainwater management plan. It's a provincial requirement that applies to all municipalities in order to run a sewerage and drainage district. So the focus of that plan, though, for Vancouver that doesn't have a lot of natural streams, was actually on the water quality issues. And so when Vancouver started to look at how are we going to implement green infrastructure as part of our work and started to understand what the broader issues, I think there was a very quick recognition that actually water quality is critical, and it's a piece of work we really need to advance aggressively. But actually, really what's going to hit us more quickly probably is going to be the resiliency question, and it's both about too much and too little water. So I know people, if you live here, you know it, like we've had these huge events. Who lives in the Olympic Village and was around late October last year? Little cloudburst event. Yeah, well, our neighborhood energy utility had a major, major flood. I know there was pictures coming out on Twitter of people in the streets, like the water up in their cars. This was not a big, giant warning event that we were prepared for. This was just like a little system that passed through, opened up, and dumped out the water. I didn't have it in this slideshow, but I've got some pictures of Broadway and Cambie in front of our engineering department. Again, these tiny little systems that were just come through, open up, and drop a huge amount of rain. And at Broadway and Cambie, there is absolutely nowhere for that water to go. It is buildings to concrete sidewalks to asphalt streets and massive streets. So we're generating a lot of rainwater runoff. So I think through the Rain City strategy, there was an early recognition that actually we needed to alter course and keep the important values around water quality, but it needed to be underpinned by resilience at its foundation. So we actually went back to council in November of 2017 and actually recommended that one of the core goals and objectives of the initiative was to be around resiliency. And we're thinking about it broadly. Obviously, climate change is a big part, but it's going to be one of the big directions when we go to council on November 5th is looking at how we're understanding better our risk and vulnerability and thinking about our city at watershed scales. Because before we've been just sitting thinking about what project are we doing in an area where development is happening. We're not thinking how is all of the water through the system impacting our low-lying areas or our coastal flood protection or water security and generating enough water supply, because the 2015 drought is a part of our future. We know that with climate change, and I actually, for me as a bureaucrat faithful to try to do a good job for all you citizens, when she talked about getting the bureaucracy ready, that's not a joke. We need we need 10 to 15 years to get ourselves ready to be having some of these very innovative solutions. So that's why we actually need to start now to get the outcomes that we need so that we're ready to be more resilient for the future.
Yeah. Okay, other questions?
Well, shall we start with the audience? I think
Sure,
it's
yeah.
probably a good idea, and then we can interview
great.
with their questions
So
because they've
we'll
waited
take
for
a
so
couple
long.
of questions. The lady here. If you can use the microphone.
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All of you are very enthusiastic and certainly encouraging. But I would ask the City of Vancouver, as a first measure, when are we going to get water meters? I dare say that the San Francisco, Seattle, Los Angeles, and Portland have water meters.
Amsterdam too.
Yeah, and Amsterdam.
Devin, you wanna
And
answer
is that not the first line of defense?
Melina, do you want to
I cannot give you the official answer on that, but what I will tell you is that our water is very cheap. And so when people don't recognize the value of the water and they're not paying for it, there is a tendency to waste the resource. So we do actually have water meters on all of our commercial and multifamily houses or buildings in the city. That actually already is metered. It's largely the single family properties that are not. So this is an area that we need to address as part of our future, because we need to value the resources we have, and sometimes a price signal is part of that.
Okay. Other questions? Yes, here.
Hi there.
Hi.
Oh, sorry. Thanks again for speaking tonight. I'm just wondering if, moving forward on an urban scale, is it more useful to sort of approach this in a sort of piecemeal, sort of parcel by parcel or homeowner by homeowner or project by project basis? Or is it more useful to really start to approach things in a more holistic, sort of larger scale measure of either district or city or region, depending on what we're trying to do, and whether we need to be looking at working with the other municipalities or other larger players in this space? Thanks.
I could probably answer that, yeah. Well, I think it's neither both, actually. The funny part is, if you want to achieve a transition, so a different path and dominant ways of thinking and acting, because that's actually, you have to start with the front runners. You have to bring them together and then show that it's possible to make new solutions. And so other ones are inspired by that. It's a bit the theory behind change, actually. You first have to see it, you have to believe it, you have to act like it, like a hop, a step, and a jump. And you can say, well, we can start in one neighborhood, but if the energy is not there to change, it won't work at all. And we figured out in Amsterdam that it's much easier to bring together the people who are willing to change, then change with them, help them, bring them together, then create what we call fiercely attractive solutions and show it to the world. Show what's the bigger picture, actually. Because the funny part is, there are so many cities and there are so many inhabitants of cities like ours, and we have something to lose. So we also have a shared story, and that's what I find quite surprising. We don't know enough. Well, we're living in the most intense time of history of having information, and we're still missing each other's fiercely attractive solutions. So what are we going to do about that and create this new revolution? Because I think technically we can. That's not a thing. But how do we get it acceptance? Because I think that's the point at the moment.
Can I also respond to that one? I think that, like, we rebuild our watershed every time we touch it. Like, every day we're repaving, we're putting in a new stoplight, and that there's like DNA with the codes, what bylaws, the bylaws, and the rules, right? We have operating rules, and every agency has this sort of drawdown of rules that they use to rebuild the city every day. And so that's really boring work, but that is the nuts and bolts, and it takes a dozen years of digging into that and changing it, retuning it. But a project tells 1,000 stories. So with a lot of green infrastructure and reuse, no one even has a mental picture of what that is. So you can talk till you're blue in the face and people have no idea what you're talking about. But you have to create a project. One project that tells that story is worth a lot. So I think they're two parallel paths.
Okay, as the person who studied this question for Vancouver, I would say this is an all hands on deck need, honestly. I think we've taken for granted our water resources. We've taken for granted that we have a drainage system that is designed to basically take water from a giant hill and send it high speed down to our receiving water, usually contaminated. The reality for Vancouver is we're a combined sewer city, as many other older cities, so we're not the only ones with this problem. But what it means is that every bit of effort that we put into getting water out of our pipe system is less overflow during heavy or light rain events, depending on your catchment, into our receiving water. So if we care about salmon, if we care about orcas, if we care about the quality of our aquatic ecosystems, then it actually becomes an imperative for all of us to act. And so we've actually done quite a bit of spatial analysis and looking at what's our current circumstance and what kind of deployment we could get. And we looked at questions like renewal. So for example, new development, about 1% of our building stock changes over every year. So what does that mean? 100 years to have new regulation help you achieve your outcome. How many people want to wait 100 years to protect our salmon? Not many, probably. It's really challenging. And then on the public infrastructure side, it's the same thing. You know, we have certain asset renewal rates where we're going in and we're making changes because it's at the end of its life. Often with transportation, we're doing upgrades, maybe because we want to provide better facilities or biking or pedestrian or transit infrastructure. And so the way that I like to think about what we're trying to accomplish in Vancouver is a new way of doing business where water management is the new norm, is mainstream, is just part of how we're doing business. I remember as a young transportation engineer in the early 2000s, I started at the city in 2000. At that time, if you can believe it, we weren't always thinking about how were we going to accommodate the pedestrians, right? Can you imagine that now? Look at our city, right? Where half of our trips are not by automobile mode. Downtown, it's like 85%. Can you imagine a place that we didn't think about how to accommodate the pedestrian in public space? Well, then it was, oh, gee, maybe we should put street lights in the major crossing locations. Oh, maybe we should put street trees. Okay, now every new project should have street trees. And my view and where we'd like to go with the Rain City strategies, in the future, every new project is doing its part to help manage water quality. So we're talking about the volume of water, we're also talking about the water quality so that we again can help protect those precious resources that we have in our beautiful environment.
Okay, yeah, we have 2 questions, so one at front and one at the back.
Hi, this sort of touches on what all of you were saying is 10 to 15 years to change something. Why? Why do we have to keep reinventing the wheel when this bullet building has blown my mind as to what it does? Why can't Vancouver just look at it and go, it works? What do we have to do to change our rules? Why do we have to reprove it's going to work? Why do we have to reprove what Amsterdam has done before we're allowed to implement it? I don't understand that in our bureaucracy.
Let's take another question and then we'll respond to both of them together. So in the back, please.
Hi, just thank you for the talk. They were all great. And to answer your question earlier, I think the City of Vancouver since 2010 has been installing water meters on all buildings, so single family included. Melina, I wanted to ask about purple hydrants, and is there a plan for that? So not just reusing stormwater for toilets, but also for firefighting.
Yeah, so we are very, very interested. It's not actually a coincidence that Rosie's here. I wanted her to come and talk about what San Francisco's done because we're really inspired by how they've been able to accelerate their efforts on non-potable water systems. And my interest is most definitely looking at how do we shorten that time to get to innovation and trying new things. And actually, I will say for the record, I believe the city has a great track record of doing innovations in many different areas. In the water sphere, it's newer for us. It's more traditional approaches that have been dominating. So for the non-potable water system, one of the recommendations that we're going to be putting forward to council on November 5th when we go with the Rain City strategy is to actually develop non-potable water policy and plans. Our development building and licensing team, they have actually implemented a rainwater harvest and reuse permit program that is now actually in effect. I think that went in to effect this year. So that's a starting point, but what we're thinking is much more broad, and how do we start to think about district scale opportunities, for example. And so those are some of the kinds of recommendations that we're going to be putting forward when we go to council in November.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah.
I was also going to say the power of political pressure is incredible. Like, you know, there's in our agency we'd have a few really vocal people that came to every meeting, and there would be internal conversations that would be like, gotta have an answer for this person, you know, and those questions being asked in public is a really powerful incentive for agencies.
If I come up to your question, if I understand it right, you ask why don't you keep it the way it is? Is that right?
No, why not go fast?
Oh, why don't you go faster? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's what we should do. Yeah. No, that won't take us 50 years. No. I don't think that will take us 15 years. The thing is that we developed patterns in which it's quite hard to make an innovation work. You need to have proven technology, the insurance companies, everybody. It is a complete system, and it's a change of the system, and that will take some time. But the funny part is that when it's over the tipping point, it goes. But we're not on the tipping point yet, actually. But to share all the knowledge that we have, I think that's a great achievement of what we're having here already. We are sharing, but we can do it much faster, and we not have to prove everything by ourselves. If we share the data, we we can do some extraordinary things in Vancouver, and we take it over in Amsterdam, and we export it to Copenhagen, and we give it away to Mosul because they have to rebuild their city. Something like that.
The other maybe sort of comment that I can offer, an observation, and people that have been working in this sphere longer than I have may already have had this realization, but water is very interdisciplinary, it's cross-sectoral, and affects many, many different people. And so I think, like, traditionally it might have just been the water and sewer department, predominantly the engineers that were coming up with the plans and figuring out how we should do it all. But when you start thinking about water service delivery through green infrastructure, all of a sudden you actually need your landscape architects, you need urban ecologists, you need your engineers. They still need to be actively involved in that. But all of a sudden, how you're delivering your water service is not underground anymore. It's not hidden, right? How many people do a community engagement project about a sewer pipe? Do you want the sewer pipe here or not here in your neighborhood? Has that ever happened in your history as a citizen? Probably not. But has anybody ever come to you and said, I want to change your streetscape, and I want to maybe modify some of the parking, and I want to change the look and feel of your community? Right. That's what green infrastructure is going to be doing, a lot of. So all of a sudden you can see that the kind of decision-making and collaborative process that you need both internally, with community, across professions in order to get to your outcome, it's way more complex and it needs a lot more involvement from a lot more people. So I actually believe we're moving very, very fast. And I saw one of my staff over there, Gordon. Yeah. He's on our design team, so if any of you want to talk about green infrastructure design, you can go talk to Gord. We've been doing this for about 20 years and have some really beautiful examples of things that have happened. But we've rapidly accelerated. Like, our team has delivered 38 new assets in the city in just under 2 years. It's like lightning speed. So we are moving fast. We went to the Netherlands in April, and I saw this amazing work that Sasha has been championing around blue-green roofs, and everybody in Vancouver was saying, well, we like green roofs, but we're not sure about blue-green roofs. We're not sure about the water and the ways of the risk and leaky condo and you name it, right? And I said, my God, if the Dutch are doing it on wood buildings in downtown and they are managing like 2 to 3 times the amount of water that we're trying to manage, I was like, we can do this. And so we got back, we immediately set out, okay, who are some of our partners? And this is why we really value the research partnerships that we've got happening with SFU right now. Reach out to our academic partners and say, can you join us? Let's get some research, let's get some examples. We've got some industry people involved too, and we're gonna test them out and see how it works. And when that first little project works, then we're going to bring it to another project. And they're going to see how we can look at reducing barriers to the private sector and people in the community for taking action themselves. Because I think sometimes we might have been part of the barrier that people have wanted to do innovative things. And the city, as you mentioned it, we haven't been set up to allow the leaders to lead or the innovators to innovate. And so what do we need to do differently to help enable that to happen?
Thank you very much for also pointing out the role for knowledge brokers, which is kind of where we sit. And I think the other way to responding to your question is that this cross-learning is something that can be accelerated. And that's exactly what we were doing literally today. We had innovators from City of Vancouver sitting together with those from City of Surrey, from City of North Vancouver, District of West Vancouver, talking to Sasha and her experience in Amsterdam. And I think there is a way of really accelerating that process of cross-learning and not having to wait for 15 years for the findings to come through. And I think I can say, as someone who was mediating that conversation, that there is really a lot of appetite and a lot of excitement about the possibilities that are there. So we're on to achieving those kind of learnings. So there were a few hands in the back, and well, lots of hands actually.
Okay. The MEC head office was built in 2014, and I believe YVR became Salmon Safe in 2016. Those are the only 2 commercial developments that are salmon safe in the Lower Mainland, I believe, in all of British Columbia. What is the barrier to more developers becoming certified in salmon safe? And is there any incentive that could be given to developers, whether through the CAC or some other creative way, because to, given how prevalent it is in other parts of, I believe just in North America, but what is the barrier and why is there not more of an incentive for developers or a mandatory given location or involvement in the nearest streams or creeks or watershed proximity?
I know that there are some more salmon-safe buildings coming, but I can't say, but there are more coming. And we're really excited about Salmon Safe. We think it's an amazing initiative by the Fraser Basin Council, and part of the value of it in an industry where we haven't had a lot of regulation around rainwater management or even water quality impacts, right? Like, we're generally not paying for our water quality impacts. There hasn't been a big impetus for people to do it. We are bringing about new regulations. So we have already adopted for our large sites new obligations, and with the Rain City strategy, we're going to be proposing to double the performance outcome. So that'll be coming if council's supportive on November the 5th. So that'll be just the beginning. In terms of what would help developers, I don't actually want to speak on behalf of them about what they perceive the barriers to be. But what we're committed to do at the city is work with the development community to understand their needs and to help them be successful in moving towards this new vision that we have for a more sustainable and more resilient future that's protecting water quality and using our water resources wisely. So it's probably a combination of factors, right? Economics, regulation. I mean, regulation is powerful, right? A lot of it does. You get people that want to do the right thing, but they're not the majority usually. So we try to allow the leaders to lead, help get the people that are open-minded and willing but not sure how, give them the support and guidance to help them get there, and then pull the laggards along. That's kind of been our approach. And for green buildings, it's been effective so far. So let's see how we can apply that in the water context.
Okay, there was a hand in the back. Yeah, that there.
Sorry.
The lady in the front. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name's Robin Gary. I work for Colliers International Consulting. And my question to you is, we have a stream of service where we do a lot of purpose-built rental and below-market housing developments. One of the challenges to bringing different sustainability initiatives to that is that it does obviously add an extreme amount of cost, which then takes away from the margin we're able to apply to the affordable housing metric of the development process. Are there any, as you're proposing this to council, any further economic initiatives that would help to support developers that are taking on these additional sustainability initiatives, reaching, say, Tier 2 BC building, or Tier 4 BC building code before it's required? Those kind of things to sort of help us bring that innovation along so it's not as cumbersome on project development?
Here's how I would describe our sewer and drainage system. It's full. It's full, and it's overflowing, right? And the challenge for Vancouver with that is that a lot of our infrastructure was built post-war, and so a lot of the development that's been able to happen in the city has been able to benefit from the capacity that came with that post-war development. But now that we've had sort of sustained growth over quite a few years, it's just we're using up that capacity. So what that means for Vancouver is that actually the cost of servicing is very, very high, and we're very concerned about that, actually, what that means from an affordability perspective in the city, and particularly for non-market housing that are going to have different kinds of profit margins than your like high-end condos with fabulous views that probably could afford to pay a little extra. So we're very, very conscious of that, and we actually believe that these green infrastructure strategies are more cost-effective than conventional gray infrastructure alone. And so what we're advocating for is an integrated gray-green approach that is going to be more cost-effective overall. And what we also know from our research and learning from cities like San Francisco and Portland and Philadelphia and New York and Washington and Rotterdam and Amsterdam and Berlin, you name it, Copenhagen, is that when everybody does their part, so it's going to the gentleman's question, when everybody does their part to manage water, then we're reducing the cost burden and risk overall. The way our system is designed right now, private property is able to give as much water as they want to our public system. And if you think about, again, if we go back in time, I remember early in my career I worked in waste management. And I remember the time where people could put out as many garbage bags as they wanted. Can you even imagine that today? As many garbage bags as you wanted. And then they started to realize, uh-oh, our landfill's filling up. We better start a recycling program, right? Get some of the waste out of the waste stream. And then they found it was trouble, and Asia actually doesn't want our plastics anymore. They don't want our clothes, they don't want our garbage, they don't want any of it anymore. So all of a sudden we have a problem with that. And then we came up, okay, we better have district scale composting systems, right, to try to deal with that. So I think like it is really about like a paradigm shift in our thinking and about how do we manage and be more resourceful about the water we have. We know the green infrastructure is very cost effective on a life cycle perspective. For very high density developments, it is going to be the more expensive forms of green infrastructure like water harvest and reuse or blue-green roofs. They're not the cheapest forms. If you have infiltration potential, it can be much, much more affordable than having to put, dig up and put in, hundreds or thousands of kilometers of new pipe underground. So we're really conscious of that question, and we want to do everything we can to support it. We have definitely got, as part of our proposal, to do some pilot programs where we can look at initiatives where we can support interventions and retrofits on private property to help preserve capacity in the system, build resilience, get market uptake, and develop the skills. So we'll be looking at like a broad, comprehensive view on how we can support the affordability question. But the truth is, our system is very, very expensive, and it's full. So it's going to be even more expensive if we don't change our course. And so what are the best ways we can do that? And that's what we're trying to challenge ourselves. And I also invite members of the community who have the bright ideas on how to do that. Because if you do have a single family home, if you're one of the fortunate ones in Vancouver that has that, for you doing like an on-site rain garden or bioretention is probably pretty affordable compared to something in the dense area. So maybe we need to create programs that help preserve capacity in the system so that where we need a higher density affordable housing unit, they've got capacity in the system because we've done some interventions upstream in the watershed. So anyway, we're thinking broadly about how we can support that, but we share your interest.
Anyone else like to add?
I would just say that in San Francisco, they're moving to a process of charging you based on your impervious cover. So before it would be just your water bill would be a result of how much potable water you consumed, and you could sort of discharge as much impervious surface. So like a giant big box retail would be paying, just for their small amount of service for water supply. And now it's going to flip, and so your bill will be bifurcated by how much impervious cover you have. And so then there'll be a very market incentive for people to retrofit their impervious cover.
Okay.
We put it in regulation. You're not allowed to access the stormwater sewer system if you have a new building.
Yeah.
So we have water neutral building envelopes, is how we call them. And they're part of the tender procedure actually. But to make it very clear, you're not allowed, so find out an alternative. That's the tipping point where you enter the new market. And then prices go down by itself because it will be your new normal, your new standard.
Okay, so I see 4 hands going up on this side, 1 on this side. So maybe start up here. So what we'll do is maybe take 2 or 3 questions together in the interest of time, and maybe the panelists can combine their responses. So please go ahead.
Hello, Alex Dow. Education is an incredible, important aspect of what you are doing right now, and I know that the Ministry of Education is spending hundreds of millions of dollars in what seems to be just a single-minded seismic upgrade to dozens of schools here in Vancouver. There are other programs that the Vancouver School Board are also doing for energy efficiency, etc. Bringing your ideas to projects that are already either shovel ready or retrofit ready. This could be, we could walk and chew gum at the same time. I'd like you to comment on that.
Okay, and there's one in the back, Nick.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for the presentation. I'm actually on the other side, so I represent developers, so I hope there's none of them here. Anyways, at the city level, I never knew about Salmon Safe, this kind of program, or coming on this woman here, the incentives, if there is incentives for developers. And the developers I represent, we build all throughout Vancouver, Richmond, Surrey, quite some large projects up and coming. If we're told initially at city meetings that there is these programs available that you would like developers to pursue, they will do it, because a lot of them are in just we'll put money at it and do something different instead of, yeah, I randomly came down here because an architect said I should come down here tonight.
Great. And let's take one more on this side, the lady up there.
Hi, I'm Monica. I'm a master's student at UBC. My question is, whenever I think about rainwater harvesting, one thing comes into my mind. We are just thinking about harvesting the rainwater, by which we are reducing the impact by using less groundwater. And sometimes I think, what about the regenerative development by giving back to the nature? I would like to hear your views on regenerative development.
Okay, so I'll throw it back to the panel. 3 different questions.
I just missed the last word. Did you say regional development?
Regenerative.
Oh, regenerative development. Do you want? Well, actually, Rosie is actually the expert on water harvest. Rosie, do you want to speak to that?
Do you mean sort of like mimicking the original water balance that was there before? I mean, there are definitely models. The Living Building Challenge is one that you can look at, and they have ways of helping you, match the different forms that water was on that site before. So like the Bullitt Center, I think, was modeled on a Douglas fir forest, and so the percentages of water that they're returning to the aquifer are sort of mimicking that. And so I think there's a lot of wonderful precedents in green building. It may be something, I think we talked about this at a workshop, the idea of applying to some of your new redevelopment areas, maybe a living building challenge for all new development in that area, and setting it, that you could do it for the whole neighborhood. And so you can look at what that a previous development condition would have been like. And so I think it's a fairly well-established practice. I think it's about really like, how do you codify and get it into the daily practice of the city?
We have the Rain City Strategy has an expert panel, and we really appreciate, we're really grateful for them. We have architects, landscape architects, engineers, NGOs, artists, you name it, toxicologists. We have a broad range of people that have been helping sort of advise us, and actually a key message that they wanted the city to remember is that being more resourceful about water and thinking about natural systems is not just for the benefit of the people, but also for the benefit of nature and biodiversity and all of the creatures that inhabit the ecosystem that we are all part of. And so I think, when you talk about, it's not just about like water for people, it is actually about having our healthy systems, and we, as part of the ecosystem, actually depend on all our systems being healthy.
Do you want to talk about the Salmon Safe program and builders?
What I would really love to do is we're at the beginning of a journey, and we're really excited. Our council's has adopted the climate emergency as a goal, and they're really spurring staff on to think, how can we really respond differently? So what I hope is that this can be part of a conversation where we all work together in the future. And I don't want to presume to know what is best for the development community. I want to open up a conversation of how can we help accelerate this, and how can we make it be more successful, because the truth is that we need to transform our water infrastructure in Vancouver for so many different reasons. And so, Salmon Safe is initiated by the Fraser Basin Council. If anybody's keen, I encourage them to look on their website. They basically bring in like a sharpshooter team of people that can understand an interdisciplinary perspective on water design for private property, and they go through a whole process working with a developer. But I think we're just at the beginning, and there's probably many more opportunities. And the education piece, it isn't just about the kids in the schools, but frankly, we need to educate the broader community who want to do this. And we heard when we went out to do in my 20 plus years of public engagement, I have never had an open house where there were 40 people lined up at the door before it opened. This is a public open house run by the city of Vancouver. 40 people lined up at the door, and then 1,250 people in 3 hours. Does that blow your mind? That was people wanting to come and talk about rainwater to the city of Vancouver. I was amazed. I thought, my goodness, all my years of doing community building and transportation and all these things that you think would be a hot topic, people wanted to talk about rainwater. And we weren't really sure. We just kind of had it as an open conversation. We weren't coming and saying, this is what we need to do. We just said, look, these are the kinds of situations we're going to have to deal with. What does it mean to you? And people were basically like, we want to do it. Help us. What are the tools? How can we do this? We want to do more of this. And we were kind of unprepared, frankly. We didn't have tools ready to go to say, well, here's what you can do yourself, or here's what you can do in your property. Here's how you can advocate to your landlord. Here's how you can bring your strata together and come up with some new proposals. Here's how you can work in the community to become maybe a master rain gardener, right? And support something as part of one of our stewardship programs with green streets or whatnot. We weren't prepared for that. So I think this is the kind of journey that we're on, where we need to build up that capacity and build the critical point and the tipping point of people that want to take leadership and take action, show what's working, share what's not working, and help move the dial on.
It's a pretty cool club.
I can probably add what we have done in Amsterdam is that we actively support in programs like Amsterdam Rainproof. It shows for the public, but also for developers, many opportunities of how to become rainproof. Actually, they have a website and it's very accessible. But we also support the dialogue, like say for existing building owners. And that's called the Rooftop Revolution. And they've made an application which makes it very easy when to start a conversation about what do we want to do with our rooftop. Do we want to have solar panels on it? Do we want to have rainwater storage? Do we want to have rainwater storage, a garden and solar panels? Or do we prefer a terrace? What is it going to cost? When is it going to benefit? What's my lifespan analysis? And it helps people to educate themselves, but also their whole neighborhood or their block in which they are living, but also to stimulate the building owner, if they're a renter, or to come together. And I can imagine that if you look to a grey roof and you have a green roof yourself, it's not nice too. How do you start the dialogue with the owner of the other roof? And how can you support him or her to join the movement? Well, these kind of things are quite easy to arrange, and it helps because, yes, you need guidelines. Guardians. There are more guardians. People who take you by the hand. Stewardships. Yeah, that's yeah.
Thank you. So we'll take one more round of questions. And I can add one more point to Melina's response about the Salmon Safe program. This is something that the Pacific Water Research Center is working quite closely with the Fraser Basin Council also in developing standards for water quality that comes off of these properties with these approaches implemented. So it is very much a process still under development, and I think there's some exciting prospects for what it will do eventually when it's deployed at a larger scale. So we had one more question here. Can I have a show of hands? 1, 2, and 3. Okay, great. Go ahead.
So thank you for captivating presentations. You've got my propeller head spinning, so thank you for that. Rosie, a question for you, but for the whole panel too. One of your slides, and I think it was brought to you by the clinician who wanted to process her own water in her home. I recognized a lot of the technology in that, and most of that was focused on dealing with biological contaminants. What about the chemical contaminants in our environment, the oils off the asphalts, the copper from our brake linings in our cars? I didn't see any technology there that deals with that aspect.
This was roof water.
Yeah,
this
okay.
was exclusively.
But even metal roofs.
There was
roofs.
like, I believe, an approved surface, American Rainwater Harvesting Association. There's an industry group that focuses on it, and they have some approved roofing surfaces. Like, I think there's some that are very, very toxic, and there's like a sealant that they approve on if you're retrofitting, and I think she put in new shingles. But there's a big dialogue in California right now about that very topic, about the emerging contaminants for reuse and what kind of levels of treatment because they're trying to do very large-scale stormwater reuse and treatment in Southern California. And that's actually something that I think is really interesting to be watching right now. But yeah, there definitely are a lot of contaminants. Pairing it with the green infrastructure, and then the way that the regulations worked in the States is really about that it's just a technology-based approach, that if you have the technology in place, then the water quality is assumed, to be in compliance. And so I think that further along for more stringent reuse, such as for drinking, there's a lot of conversation both for the recycled water for drinking from municipal wastewater supplies. And so the level of treatment is established for established and already regulated chemicals, but the emerging contaminants are not yet there. And so,
because the next extension of that is medicines and drugs in our use into our water streams. Right?
One of my favorite projects is called the Oraloma Wetland, and it's in the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area, and it is a discharge from a wastewater treatment plant into basically a seawall that has a bunch of treatment cells in it, and they're looking precisely at how much advanced, so you go through the whole wastewater treatment process and then running it through different biological systems for how much the emerging contaminants would be treated, and that's something you can look at online and find data about. But it's an emerging area of concern.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So one question here. And there were two more hands, one here and...
One over there.
Okay, yeah, so we'll take these three questions and maybe call it a night, and then of course our panelists will be around for a little bit more. So please go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you to you three for sharing your amazing breadth of knowledge and experience and focusing that on water. Traditionally, women were always the water keepers, so I think it's apropos that you all are there on the stage talking about this. Rosie and Sasha, thank you for traveling the distances that you have to be here, and again share with us the amazing work that you do. Melina, I love what you do with the Green Infrastructure team, and my question is twofold. What is happening with the developers and with how Vancouver's high-rises are popping up like mushrooms? How are the opportunities to create innovative partnerships with these developers to, say, mimic things like what the Billet building is doing? Like, is that happening? And also looking at the amazing historical resource we have in the area with Musqueam and Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh, how is that Indigenous knowledge being incorporated not only into the Green Infrastructure team, but also into the Rainwater Strategy Plan?
Okay, great. Let's take the other two questions and then we'll...
Hi there, thanks again. It was really inspiring to hear all of these different solutions. So I've noticed a lot of these solutions are for new developments or for mainly single family homes when it comes to existing buildings. Have you seen anything that can work with existing multifamily buildings regarding black water and gray water? That's my question.
Okay, and one last question from the gentleman.
My professor gave me this question, and I'm more on the ecological restoration side of things. But he asked me, when you ask for money for these projects, and it's quite a big sum of money, how do you justify that money should go for something like restoring Burns Bog or doing rainwater harvest, stormwater management for, say, 20 years in the future, when we already have problems like homelessness, addiction, and so what kind of argument do you give? And especially considering you've got quite a few programs off the ground there, I was just wondering, like, what reason do you give, or if you are given this argument yourself? Thank you.
I think the gal at the back there was talking about affordable housing. I think nobody's going to deny that we've got a crisis of affordability and social vulnerability, in our city. And so we actually see that there's a great potential through our green infrastructure work and through our rainwater management to take dollars we would have invested in water management that could have been pipes underground that nobody would see or experience, that would have a function, but not a fulsome range of functions, and actually use it to leverage interests around Indigenous reconciliation and around equity and intersectionality. So we're definitely, my team, I see Michelle from my team there too, like we're on a learning, we're trying to learn and be open and understand, but I'll just give some examples. So we've done a lot of spatial mapping of the city, and we know that urban heat is actually a very, very serious issue. It's a health issue in the city, and Vancouver Coastal Health, when we met with them about the Rain City strategy, they said that as soon as the temperature gets above 25 degrees Celsius, morbidity and mortality rates increase. Okay. 2009, we had a heat wave, 34 degrees Celsius over the course of about a week. Very, very high for Vancouver. 123 people died in Vancouver proper. Not Metro Vancouver, Vancouver proper. And who were the folks that died? The people who were socially isolated, people with disabilities, young people, elderly people, and people who had other underlying medical conditions. And it's funny when you think about it, it's like if someone else told you that 129 people died in Vancouver over the course of a week due to a single related incident, people would be shocked. Like, what if there was like a balcony that collapsed and 129 people? We'd have new bylaws, we'd have the building code, we'd have the engineering association. But unfortunately, it was our most vulnerable community who were most affected by that. And so what we know about green infrastructure, and you guys didn't see it in Sasha's presentation, but I've been with her for the past 3 days, and it's been amazing. Green infrastructure is nature's air conditioning in the city, right? It's holding back the water. It's releasing the water back into the atmosphere. The trees and the greenery are absorbing that energy and releasing it back as evaporation. When we have concrete buildings and asphalt sidewalks, it holds the heat and then re-radiates the heat. And so it's like, let me count the ways that green infrastructure has benefits that are positive to the community. And what I know as someone working in the engineering department for City of Vancouver is we need to spend literally hundreds of millions, if not billions, in the next decades on water-related infrastructure. Why not choose infrastructure approaches as much as we can, and it's not going to be all green infrastructure, but as much as we can, where $1 invested is going to yield benefits that are going to enhance the community. How many people got kids here? I got 3. I'm worried about the nature deficit. I grew up in farm country. I grew up racing around fields and forests and all that, and I love the city. But I also feel like my kids aren't seeing and experiencing nature in the way that I was able to when I was growing up, and that honestly makes me a bit sad. And so I think about what is the benefit, what's the psychological, emotional health well-being of having trees and nature and insects and butterflies and bees in your environment where you are every day. And the more your public space is beautiful and inviting and healthy and welcoming, the more you get out and enjoy it, the more you bump into your neighbors, the more you feel like you're part of your community and it's part of your place. So I feel like the economic rationale for doing green infrastructure, it's there just in terms of cost effectiveness for pure engineering water services delivery. Like if I had to just put my pure engineer hat on, it's there. And if you want the studies, read the Rain City strategy when it comes out, because we provide lots of case studies of other cities that have looked at these. But then for me, the bigger value proposition is how do we use green infrastructure to actually leverage a whole broad subset of community interests that I think are shared quite broadly within Vancouver. And so then it makes it an even more compelling reason to start to transition our systems to have more gray as part of our service delivery.
Great.
And just on the Indigenous piece, I just want to say that actually that's something we care a lot about, figuring out how we can be better guided by Indigenous reconciliation and understanding Indigenous knowledge. And again, that's a growth area. For us, the city does aspire to be a city of reconciliation, but there's a long way to go. And we've had some really nice partnerships with Tsleil-Waututh, who are wanting to have a food fishery in Burrard Inlet. Well, guess where our #1 combined sewer overflow is? Burrard Inlet, right? So I feel like we have a part to play as citizens, as professional people, to work with the communities to understand how we can do it. And we've lost our relationship with water in the city and our indigenous communities. Like when we spent time with some folks from Musqueam, you know, they're like, yeah, when you guys did that project up and blah, 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 this is what we started to see with our water. Like they had an understanding of the relationship of the land and the water systems that was like it's just not there for most of us. So I feel like there's a lot for us to learn and grow and understand. And I know that there's been communicated to us of values around intergenerational thinking and a longer term perspective and being part of the natural systems that we can really take to heart.
Okay, great, thank you. Sasha and Rosie, maybe some final thoughts or inspiration that you want to leave behind with everyone at the end of the day?
I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on what Melina just said about sort of the relationship to the land and the water. And I always think that there's so much value about reframing cities as watersheds, because I think we think of watersheds, if even know what the word is, it's something that's far away where your water supply is. But when you live and you think about your city as a watershed, it really does matter what the upstream does on the downstream, and those relationships, when you begin to water, water is basically follows topographic lines downhill, and those relationships are so interconnected. And so just raising literacy and understanding about the role of living on the land in a watershed with the upstream and the downstream and the interconnectedness is really important, not only for fostering empathy, but also understanding risk for climate change and being able to contribute, knowing that maybe your particular intersection isn't the most important in the world, but maybe the downstream is, or the upstream, and like what you do upstream works downstream. And it's a really great metaphor for the environment as a whole. And I just would really encourage people to really reframe their relationship to the land in that way. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah. Sasha.
Now, today the topic was reframing green infrastructure, and I think that's the interesting point here. It's not only water management, but it's the interest of many angles, actually. So it's the interest of business, it's the interest of our future children, it's the interest of water management, but it's also the interest of how are we going to make our existing cities, which are worth fighting for, We live here, we thrive here, this is our place. And funny enough, a city you cannot take under your arm and walk away. So, okay, we move on. So it's worth rethinking and just starting to build a more resilient asset than we're having right now. And then we're a bit future-proof. I think that's the challenge that we're facing. And nature can help us. It has experience for over millions of years, while we are still here for such a short time, and we have cities for such a short time. And we probably made choices built on old assumptions. And we still have the time to rethink those old assumptions, and not only to rethink, but to react. So I find it very interesting that we have met, and that we spent so many splendid days, and that I saw all the amazing projects that you're having here, because we can learn from each other and we can upskill together. So not only rethink, we're going to react, I think. Yes, that's what we should do. Thank you so much for being here and share all the stories and all the things. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would like to add my thanks to all of you for being a part of the dialogue and for coming up with interesting questions. And this is a series that we will continue, so please watch this space, look at the SFU and PWRC websites. So I have small tokens of appreciation for our three speakers who did a wonderful job of not only laying forward some innovative ideas, but actually getting us all excited about what the possibilities are by implementing all of those. So we're very grateful for that. So we have small tokens that describe the event, and we have some chocolate for you.